Spirit of Life is a beloved poem hymn among Unitarian Universalist churches. We're going to sing it through 2 times, so if you're visiting this morning, you can listen once and then join in the second. And I invite you to remain seated in the spirit of contemplation as we sing. The poet Christian Wyman writes, "In the end, we go to poetry for one reason, so that we might more fully inhabit our lives and the world in which we live them, and that if we more fully inhabit these things, we might be less apt to destroy both." As I was thinking about our spiritual practice series this summer, I knew that we had to do a poetry service, because poetry is the most consistent spiritual practice I have ever had in my life. Meditation comes and goes for me, but poems last, and they are always there with me and for me, in part because we tend to share them weekly in our worship. I had someone ask me recently, what scripture do Unitarian Universalists share as a religiously pluralistic group of folks who don't all turn to the Christian scripture or the Jewish Bible or any other scriptures as their single source? And I had to think about it for a minute, and at first I said questions. And I still think that that might be true and not unrelated to my second answer was maybe poetry. And when I say our spiritual texts that we share might be poetry, I don't mean that there are specific poems or some specific way of speaking or putting words together that we share. What I mean is that we together grapple to find the words that can touch something very mysterious and something beyond what we can express. That we come together before this great mystery, and all of us have different, specific, precious words that describe it. And that if we can speak with enough poetry to one another, we can begin to understand one another and what we mean when we describe this mystery that we gather together around. And I know poetry can be intimidating, probably because of how it was taught to us sometime in our education. But I have some words from the poet Padre Gotuma that I think can make it a little more accessible. Padre Gotuma hosts a podcast called Poetry Unbound, where each episode he shares a poem that moves him and then talks for a while about why. And his whole mission is kind of to demystify poetry, and I want to hope to do that a little bit for us today. Padraig writes, "A poem is a difficult thing to define. What is it? It's a little block of ink on a page, sometimes 5 lines long, sometimes 50. It's a house of memory. It's a clockwork thing you can carry in your pocket. Take it out, set it to go, and it goes. Tick tock, it says, sometimes rhyming with itself. Some poems are full of love and some of anger. Some poems remember things that shouldn't be forgotten. Other poems fantasize about the future, acting as a warning for today. Some sound like a song, others like a story. All poems use craft, careful choices of words, line breaks, metaphor, and form. I love these elements of poetry, but I know that those technicalities are only one way to love a poem. Most people remember a poem because it reminds them of something, a grief of their own, a moment of love in their life, a decision they had to make, a time of wonder and delight, a landscape they had forgotten, a pain they carried. Somehow those little clockworks get into the heart and help it go, help it rhyme, help it in ways we cannot define. For me, poetry is sacred because it helps us reach each other across the expanse of our very particular experiences. And for me, poetry is sacred because it helps me touch upon the holy that is wordless, that is beyond words. I started my spiritual practice of poetry by reading as much as I could, and eventually it evolved into writing, haltingly, a little poetry of my own. And I wanted to share with you this morning, as the end of my reflection, one of my first efforts to say something about poetry and the holy. So this is called Talking About God. I have no idea whether I believe in God. The question is too small for the vastness inside us and beyond. Ask me about what my spirit reaches for when I am quiet for more than a moment for a change. Ask me what my soul can barely stretch to touch just past the edge of my skin. I'd rather talk about the deepest mystery I've ever glimpsed with my grasping, limited mind. I'll gladly tell you about the feel of the room at the moment of death or of birth. I could describe to you the spaciousness that opens in my head when I breathe long enough just so, and the way the words rise from deep behind my belly to meet you. All the ways I am held by water and silence and human arms when it feels like the paradoxes of love will pull me apart. And how I am tethered to the earth and the seasons and my ancestors' dreams and their sins. Let me show you how time and matter fold back on themselves just to hold us, and how together we wander to the precipice of the questions that really matter. Bring me a towering stack of poems. Then, and only then, can we talk about God.